In a previous video on this channel, I discussed the idea of police failing when it matters the most. Obviously, I was doing this in the context of the Texas situation where the police not only failed to enter and breach the school while there was an active shooter in there, but they actually told stories, fables, myths that appeared to puff up the department about how a school resource officer totally engaged this guy outside and there was some back and forth, but the guy just happened to slip by, and how they stormed the school eventually, and the police did a great job. And you had the press conference and all this adulation for the department when it turns out, it appears right now, that they did not follow their own protocol. In the state of Texas, you are supposed to breach immediately, step over every single horror that you encounter, and go put the shooter in the ground. They did not do that. They called Border Patrol. Border Patrol actually stepped up in this situation, but unfortunately and horrifically, so many children ended up dying before the police actually took action. And there's horrible video of parents outside of the schools telling the police that they'll go in because the police aren't going in, begging them to actually do something, and the police are deflecting the parents from entering to go get their kids. And it's just a terrible situation in every way. And it's important that I cover stories like that. It's important that I tell you when the police are lying, when they're not doing their job, when they're breaking protocol, because sometimes the police act like any other government agency and they're more interested in covering their own asses than doing what is right or telling the truth. And it is important to acknowledge when that occurs, especially in situations that are horrifically tragic. Now, I spared you guys my LARPing expedition where I talked about how I would have done this or that. I said quite clearly that I'm a random citizen. I probably wouldn't have done anything as a random citizen. I would have been horrified. But again, it is not my job. It is not my protocol to intercede in that situation. However, today I want to talk about somebody who was a retired police officer, somebody who was confronted with a very similar situation while working as a security guard, who did step up, who embolized what we believe in terms of law enforcement and the heroism that law enforcement can produce. We're going to get into this, but of course we have a sponsor for this video, so we'll throw it over to them and then we'll come back on the other side. Drones used to just be toys. I know this for a fact because I used to sell them at the mall when I was 19 years old and they were nothing special. But now they're major business investments. If you're a YouTube vlogger, if you're making a top tier big budget movie for a major studio, or if you're just a serious enthusiast, you want to get yourself a drone. And one of the drones that I recommend is this tactical drone right here. You see, this drone actually shoots in 4K. It shoots up to 60 frames per second, which means you can get slow motion. And right now, if you go to flyminidrone.com, you can get it for 50% off. Get your foot in the industry, learn to fly a drone that actually shoots 4K. Flyminidrone.com. Let's give it a test flight. Now, as you guys, I'm sure, are aware at this point in time, because this was the story a week or so before the story broke in Texas, there was a very similar mass casualty incident in a supermarket in Buffalo, New York. However, unlike what went down in that elementary school, which appeared to be a guy that was completely unhinged who decided to target an elementary school after shooting his grandmother, this was actually racially motivated. The white teenager actually specifically drove 2 hours out of his way to target the replacers, what he called them, which he believed to be Black Americans. Now, the idea that Black Americans are replacing white people is absurd in every possible way. First of all, if you look at the census from the last go-around, they actually dropped in population from 13% to 12%, number one. Number two, Black Americans have kind of been with us from the jump. They're included in the packaging. They're American citizens. So obviously this guy's ideology was unhinged. Obviously this guy is a monster and he's not even worthy of being named on this channel. But for those of you who are confused about where I stand on somebody murdering innocent people while they're grocery shopping, I'm 100% against it. I'm 100% against this guy, just like I'm against anybody who decides to target anyone else for racial reasons or political reasons or some crazy combination of the two. And this guy's a perfect example of why the death penalty is needed and why even states like New York should at least have it on the books so that they can enforce it against people who do things that are so outrageous that anybody in the state, anybody in the country would support their execution. When I found out that this guy was able to be talked down, and I understand why the police had to talk him down. If that's an option, you have to utilize it. I knew he was going to live the rest of his life on the taxpayer dole, and honestly, that's just too good for him. This guy deserves capital punishment. This is the reason why we have capital punishment, and I was thinking and contrasting this to the state of Texas and what would happen if he was captured there, and I wouldn't be that concerned over there because I know for a fact in the state of Texas, this is the kind of person that they would put down. Unfortunately, this guy is going to live. He was too cowardly to take his own life. He probably should have done that first before he started killing random people, but that's where we're at in this situation. Now, we're going to move on from his utter cowardness. We're going to move on from his utter weakness to talk about Aaron Salter Jr. because Aaron Salter Jr. was a security guard at the market at the time of this event. And a lot of people have seen videos of security guards not really do anything to shoplifters and all of that, and they think that they're no big deal. But it turns out that Aaron Salter Jr. was a big deal. He was a retired, decades-long Buffalo police officer, and when he saw his community in danger, he actually stepped up. He actually put shots on target on the suspect, and unfortunately the suspect was wearing body armor, so those shots weren't able to stop him, and the suspect obviously shot at him and ultimately ended up killing him. But this act of heroism needs to go noticed. People need to see what this man did. People need to know what this man did. When seconds counted, he was there. He decided that he was going to risk his own life, not wait for backup. Nobody would have gave any heat to him as a security guard, as an elderly man, for not stepping up in that moment, and yet he did it anyway.
It is my profound honor and duty to posthumously award Officer Aaron Salter with the Medal of Honor for his sheer bravery in taking on the face of evil in order to save lives. Aaron saved lives.
This is not easy for me, and I'm not okay. This is tough. Aaron was a good man, a good person, and we all deserve better.
Now, there's been a lot of adulation, a lot of people coming forward talking about the impact that Aaron Salter Jr. had in their lives, what a great guy he was, and how many interesting hobbies this guy had. He actually had a YouTube channel right here on this platform where he went over his efforts to build a hydro-powered vehicle. This was something that he was interested in, and if you know anything about older people in the United States of America, retired people in the United States of America, you know, especially men, they got a ton of different skills. They love tinkering with things, and he was a good representative of that. Now, I know a lot of conspiracy theorists are like, oh, every time somebody builds a water-powered vehicle, something tends to happen to them, but honestly, let's set that aside. Let's not go into that. I don't want to besmirch his name with any crazy conspiracy theories. I just want to talk about what this man represents in terms of policing, because obviously, he still had the will to be a police officer. Obviously, this was a guy who didn't join for the pension. He didn't join for the lifetime benefits. You get all those things if you sign up for sanitation. You get all those things if you sign up for other government positions in the state of New York. This was somebody who dedicated his life to service, which is why after he finished his service as a police officer, he still worked in the community. He was still hired on as a security guard. Even again, during a pandemic that affects the elderly, he was still out there when so many Americans, so many younger Americans, are still afraid of their own shadow and refuse to go to work. And the thing is that beyond him as an individual, I want to talk about what he represents. This idea, this concept, this theory in policing that he is a perfect example of. Previously on this channel, we talked about David Dorn, and we talked about how David Dorn actually represents one of the noble causes that draw people to policing. And I described it as the smell of the victim's blood. And we talked about how David Dorn died defending a pawn shop, but the reason he was actually there was not to protect the TVs that were being looted or anything like that. The reason he was there is because he actually worked the case of the owner of that pawn shop when that person was a kid and members of his family were murdered. And David Dorn was so animated by the smell of the victim's blood, by that noble calling, that he was in this person's life throughout his life.
One example of that was his friendship with a young man named Lee. David met him when Lee was just a kid, after members of his family were attacked and murdered. Dave took a special interest in the boy. They bonded, and their friendship grew and remained strong throughout the years. Lee eventually opened a pawn shop. He trusted Dave implicitly and asked Dave to help with security. David readily agreed. Whenever the shop's alarm would go off, The alarm company called Dave. He would investigate. If he got a call after I went to bed, he would wake me up and tell me he was going to Lee's, just to make sure everything was all right.
And as his wife tells it, he would always run out and check on Lee because he was still somebody who's trapped in working that case. And his dedication went beyond that individual murder case. It went beyond his time as a police officer because, again, these are the kind of people that the smell of the victim's blood activates something within them that they cannot help but act. Well, the second noble cause that draws people into policing, that innate feeling that makes heroes out of people who wear the uniform, is a concept called the Tower. And the best visualization from the Tower, and I actually believe it comes from a Texas shooting where there was somebody in a tower at a university. I will link an article related to it so you guys can understand what went down in that story. It comes from this visual of everybody running away from the tower, but the police charging in. And this is the concept that Aaron Salter Jr. represented more than any other officer I've seen highlighted in the news. Because we all know that most people, when the shooting happens, when it goes down, would run away. They're more concerned about getting themselves out of harm's way rather than helping others. In fact, even wearing the uniform does not bestow any greatness upon you that leads you to charge into that situation. And even taking off the uniform does not remove that if you already have that from within you. And Aaron Salter Jr. ran towards the tower. He charged into the danger.
By helping one of the victims with her groceries outside, when the purest form of evil revealed itself yet again in another act of senseless gun violence, Aaron was in a complete defensive position, but was able to make it back into the store to warn others and find a position of cover where he was able to take action. Aaron bravely fought evil that day. This fight allowed numerous customers precious seconds to run through the cash register lanes towards the back of the store while Aaron remained up front fighting. That act of bravery led to his ultimate demise.
Even though he only had the preparations that one would have as a security guard. Luckily, he was an armed security guard, but unfortunately, due to the fact that that coward who was targeting these people at this grocery store was wearing body armor, even putting shots on target wasn't enough for him to win the day. Now, don't get me wrong, police departments around the country right now have plenty of examples of heroism that you could point to and highlight as noble acts by the officers. The younger generation is better equipped, better trained than ever before, and hopefully that will mean that less officers die when confronting dangerous situations. However, there's something to be said about the old cop, the old warrior who never lays down his sword, even though he technically retires, and that is what Aaron Salter Jr. represented. He was retired in name only. He still, no matter what uniform he was wearing, whether it be the Buffalo PD, whether it be a rent-a-cop security guard uniform, was the guy who stepped up when it mattered, because that's not something that you teach. That is something that was innate, and it's something that should be celebrated and acknowledged. Obviously, I wish he was still here with us. Obviously, I wish he would have put shots on this guy's head so that guy wouldn't be here with us. Obviously, it is a cruel joke, an insult to everything that is good and virtuous, that this hateful 18-year-old coward is going to live on the taxpayer's dime for the rest of his natural life, while we have an officer who lived as an example of one of the noble callings that draw people into service, into policing, fall at his hands. But we're going to remember Aaron Salter Jr. We're going to remember all the cops who step up in situations like this, whether they succeed or whether they tragically come up short, because that's what good people do. That's what good nations do. And these are the kind of people who not only bring communities together, but overall, enough of these men actually bring a nation together.
He would want me to say that hope is greater than fear. He would want me to say that weeping may endure for a night, but joy will come in the morning. I believe that he would want me to say, don't worry about him, he's all right.
Anyway, those are just my thoughts. I apologize if this video was less structured than you guys are used to, but when I realized what this officer represented, I had to do a story on it, and obviously the emotions are starting to take over. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, you show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias, support me via the support links in the description box. This has been me talking about an absolute hero. Till next time.